Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 30 of my 2022 reads. This week I read a couple of books that I absolutely loved and a couple of other books that were okay, but just not quite my style, including a DNF. Timestamps and content warnings are in the description box below. First, I finished Between Two Kingdoms by Suleika Jaouad. This is a memoir that I read on audiobook and I loved this so much. This is such a fantastic memoir, especially the audiobook narration by the author herself. This is basically Jaouad looking at her 20s. She got diagnosed with a pretty bad type of blood cancer, type of leukemia, when she was right out of college, and she got really sick. It was very difficult to survive that, and the first half of this memoir is just devoted to that illness, and then the second half is devoted to her trying to figure out how to live life again after she has, been through the bone marrow transplant and the chemo and everything like that, but still feels herself being stuck in this life of illness and trying to reclaim her independence and kind of meaning in life. And she goes on a road trip across the US, and that's kind of what the image on the front is from. So this is just a really well-written memoir that's incredibly engrossing, and I think one of the things it does so well is explores what it's like to be an ill young person. I read Invisible the other year, which is just about this topic, and I think that that is a great companion book if you want to read a broader nonfiction on the topic, but I thought that this memoir just did such a fantastic job about talking about all of those issues that you run into if you're somebody who maybe isn't the typical of what you would expect for somebody who is ill. A lot of times you assume that illness is something for older people, and how it interrupts all kinds of things in life, careers, relationships, fertility, all sorts of things, and just that trauma of getting over it, and how it can break so much of who you are. Really reflective, really beautifully written, very honest, very vulnerable. Absolutely loved this memoir. I give it 5 out of 5 stars, and I would for sure recommend it. Next, I read Maya and the Return of the Godlings by Rena Barron, which is the sequel to Maya and the Rising Dark. This is a middle grade contemporary fantasy series that is so fantastic. This series is about a girl, Maya, who is in middle school, along with 2 of her best friends, and they discover that they are godlings. So they are part human, part Orisha god. And they discover also that everybody in their community, lots of humans, but also some of the people are godlings like themselves. Some of the people are actually Orishas, actually gods. And Orishas are like a West African style of god. And so Maya discovers that her dad is actually a really important Orisha, and he is the person who protects the veil that separates the human world from the world of the dark. But there are tears in this veil. And in the first book, she finds out all about that. In the second book, she is working with her dad to learn how to be a better guardian of the veil and to protect the human world, and also to find out a little bit more about what the Lord of Shadows, the kind of leader of the dark world, is doing. I think that this sequel was even better than the first book. It is just fantastic. One, the magic and the world building in this is so good. It is just gripping in its pacing, like really fast-paced, but I think that the fast-paced in this book really worked for me, and often I don't like fast-paced books, but I felt like every step of the way made sense and we were being brought along with the characters. And there was also space for reflection in this, which was excellent, because even though the first book kind of presents this idea of the 2 worlds and the people from the dark world trying to invade, this one really delves a little bit deeper into that and talks about, well, who are the people who are on that side of the veil, and what are their motivations, and what's going on for them, and all these sorts of really good questions when you're talking about an issue like war. So I thought this was absolutely fantastic, so engaging, so well written, excellent for middle grade readers, but also as an adult, I think if you like fantasy, this is just such a great read. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I really, really highly recommend it. Plus, I'm excited because the 3rd book is coming out later this year. Next, I read The Roundhouse by Louise Erdrich. This is a book that I buddy read with Leo at Leo Bancroft, who I will link below. And I had wanted to read Louise Erdrich for quite a while, and Leo had recently read some of Erdrich's work, and I mentioned, like, I really want to read some of this, and so we decided to buddy read The Roundhouse, which is one that we've both heard people mention before. It's kind of like a modern classic. And so we went into this without really knowing what the book was about, which maybe was a mistake because this book is actually quite heavy. So the story in this takes place in the 1980s, and it's told from a middle school boy's perspective. And his mom is attacked. She is raped and almost murdered in kind of the Roundhouse, which is like this sacred spot on their land. They live on a reservation. But it's very, very complicated because the mom won't talk about what happened. And also the Roundhouse is right next to a lot of land that isn't within the reservation, and that makes the legalities of things very, very complicated for how they can even prosecute anybody if they were to find out who did it. And so this is all about this boy kind of trying to help discover what happened to his mom, and sort of his family and his community being really affected by the events. Definitely it has some real content warnings, so check those out below. It starts out though, like the first half of this feels a little bit lighter in spirit somehow. Like a lot of the details of the attack are maybe alluded to, but not really directly spelled out on page. You have this boy who's doing it almost feels like boyish antics of going by the water and looking into things. It just feels a little bit more lighthearted, but the second half gets really graphic and really heavy, and this book just ends very heavy in a way that kind of like traumatized me. I was not expecting how hard the ending of this would be, and I think that one of the reasons why I often like things like middle grade or romance is because you can tackle some pretty heavy issues, but in a way that is gentle to the reader. And I felt that this was not gentle to the reader, and I was in such a bad mood after finishing this book. And I know that Leo too was like, oh wow, that was a heavy ending. It was a lot to handle. So I think for me, this ended up being 3.5 out of 5 stars just because of how traumatized I felt by the ending. But if you're not somebody who's sensitive to that kind of thing, it's probably fine for you. And I think the writing was really beautiful, and the topics that it addressed about issues affecting reservations, all that sort of stuff was really good. And lastly, I did have one DNF, which was Spellbound by Bishakh Som. So this is a graphic memoir by a trans woman who does a really interesting thing in the memoir where she tells her memoir using a different person. So she uses a person who she names Anjali, who is a cis woman, but tells her story through this character. And I think that part of that, I didn't finish the memoir, so I'm not positive, but I think part of that is just to focus on all the other things in her life that make her her. And I thought that was a really interesting choice, and it was a very interesting experience, but I got only 24% through because this book did a couple of things that just weren't quite working for me. One of them is that the author, I think, is very sensitive as a person, and there are a lot of interactions of people being very mean to her, and that was just hard to read. It's definitely a real experience, but it was hard for me as a reader. Again, I struggle with like a lot of emotional drama or trauma or these sorts of things. The other thing is that a lot of what this memoir is about her journey into becoming a graphic novelist, where she used to be an architect and then quit her job in order to pursue her passion in graphic work. And so there's a lot of very, very mundane details of, you know, what time she woke up and what she had for lunch and how she sat and, you know, how many pages she drew that day. And it was just a little slow, a little mundane for me. And then to have that alternate with some of these past interactions and reflections and people being so mean. It was just not quite my style. I also somehow struggled a little bit with the lettering in this, but it was just not quite for me. But I think that it's a really neat story, and I think that the way that it's being approached is also really neat, and just such an interesting experience of somebody who's quit their job in order to become a graphic novelist, and I think that there's a lot of really relatable things in this, even if it just didn't quite work out for me. Okay, so that's everything that I read and DNF'd this week. If you guys have read any of these, if you're interested in them, if you have any thoughts, or if you want to share what you've been reading this week, I'd love to hear from you. Just leave me a comment down below.